Okay. Don't see Ruvain here this morning. So if he doesn't get online, I'll knock on his door. What in the waste basket here? Today is the 26th, right? What, all day?
All day. You come in.
Okay. Oh, that's today's. I announced it yesterday, but it's today. Okay, no, Michael is not here this morning.
You okay? Do you know Rabbi?
Yes, he had a doctor's appointment. He told me first thing this. Yeah, I know. Yeah, Ruvain, I'm not sure what the situation is, but Michael told me he had a doctor's appointment, and oh yeah, he's been back in shul, I understand, but he's coming to the.
Last time I had one,
But he's been
I
going.
busted the chops of the anesthesia. They told him I didn't want it.
Yeah.
What did he give me a speech?
Well, it depends on your age. Depends on your age. Last time I had one, they told me you didn't need it till you after age 75.
What's that?
Colonoscopy.
I'm not talking about the donut. I'm talking about getting put out.
What? It's up to 80. No, they now. I was told after a certain age, instead of going through the whole, they advise you to, that you have a package you can send away for. They advertise on TV. That's a good. Right? Yeah, that's a little. You send away the thing, and then you send it. That's acceptable after a certain age. At least that's what my doctor told me.
Depends on your condition. If you have pre-existing condition.
Yeah, it's another.
Okay, the dues forgiveness should be coordinated with the colonoscopy age.
Yeah.
So after age 75, no more dues.
Oh yeah, sure.
That's a good idea.
You know what would happen? The show would go broke, Bob. At that point.
They do have that, but you got to be 100.
Yeah.
They do have it. If you hit 100, they won't take it.
No colonoscopy, no dues.
I'm pretty sure when I reach 100, I won't be paying anybody.
Right. Well,
I think they should make it 90. Whatever.
Okay, gentlemen, I'm going to start the learning sponsors, and before I do, a reminder that the money must be in to Mel or Taheshi for the Siyum. Okay, again, that is going to be held Friday morning, November the 3rd, as a breakfast.
Right here, right?
Right. Okay. Okay. Learning sponsors, a year of learning, friends of Malaskotsky, Moshe Zelig, Ben Mordechai, Martin Lippman and family in memory of his wife, Malka Chana Bat Pinchas, friends of Herb Jeremiah, Tzvi Ben Zev, friends of Sam Coleman, Shmuel Ben Yaakov, friends of Gideon Lazinski, Mordechai Shlomo Ben Meir, Bella and David Adler in memory of her father, Eliyahu Ben Yosef Kohen. Those who were inspired by our Rebbetzin Emerita, Sheila Shapiro, Sarah Esther Malka, Bat Meshulam Yisachar, Gail and Leslie Kaplan, in memory of their parents, Mushka Shprinza Bat Yosef Chaim Bachava, Hanan ben Moshe Eliezer V'chana, Pesha bat Shmuel Yitzchak Halevi V'tzipora, Yisr ben Yoel Moshe HaKohen V'chana. Rexford Friends of Gladys Sherman, Gutta bat Meir, Michael Klein and Friends of Judah Klein, Yehuda Tzvi ben Chaim, Marsha Brana in memory of her husband, Harav Yerachmiel ben Shmuel. A month of learning by Ruvain and Susan Podolsky in memory of his father, Tzvi ben Pinchas. A week of learning by Michael and Sharon Glass in memory of his father, Yitzchak Tzvi ben Yichal Michal, by Chaim Aber in memory of his father, Aaron Meir. And also again today, a day of learning by Sheila and Eli Zimmerman in memory of her mother, Cyril Bad Menachem Mendel. Amen. Shamas Heaven Aliyah, Crank Rafia, Velta Yeshua Shemat Liyah, L'chol B'nai Israel, Good Gaben Shia.
Amen.
Okay. Right. Okay, we will be, again, a reminder quickly that we'll be finishing up Kedushin on a week from tomorrow. Okay, so if for some reason you don't have a copy of Baba Kama, I suggest you put your orders in. Okay. Assuming if you want art scroll, if you don't have art scroll for Baba Kama and want your own volume, right? I'm sure we can either order it directly from Art Scroll or from Amazon. Okay. All right. So I'm going to start us off actually from the bottom of Ayin Gimel Amud Beis towards the very bottom. Okay. 3 lines up from the bottom. The Gemara was trying to tell us about Nemanut, about validity in giving testimony. And it had mentioned already clearly that the midwife, okay, is one who can give testimony, but there were some concerns, says the Gemara, as to whether she was looking away or not, things like that. Okay, question of challenges. So now the Gemara wants to give another example of Nemanus regarding this business of trustworthiness. Okay, and this one is in terms of monetary, financial.
Actually, when it says that the midwife is believable, I mean, she's obviously believable about the baby itself, but how does she know anything about the father? When it says
Okay.
that she's lemon about whether it's a nussing, whether it's a mamzer.
Okay, good question. I'm not gonna give you an answer right now, because as we get about halfway down the Amud and Ayin Daled, they're going to bring up that topic again. Okay, so at that point, I think, if you don't mind, Alan, we'll come back to it. Okay, but it's a very valid question. All right. All right, so 3 lines up from the very bottom of the Amud on Ayin Gimel, Ne'aman bal mekach lomar zeh macharti. The person that's selling an object is believed to be is valid in his testimony that I sold it to ulazeh. Okay, I sold it to this one. Ulazeh ein macharti, and that one I didn't sell it to. Okay, I sold it to X, says I sold it to Y, but I didn't sell it to Z. Okay, what happens? B'medvarim amorim. What are we talking about? When is his testimony acceptable? Erwin, you back there? Yeah, okay. Right. Bisman shemekcho biyado. At the time that he still has, I'm going to say, rishus, that it's still in his rishus, that he still has authority over it, ownership on it in his hand. Okay? Because we've seen the word biyado implying not just literally a bird in the hand, so to speak, but literally has authority over it, right? Aval ein mikcho biyado. But if he no longer has authority or power over that object that he's selling, right? Eino ne'eman, says the Gemara, he's not believed. So the Gemara raises a question. Why are we saying that this person is to be believed? Okay, we know that at least according to Rashi's explanation, okay, Rashi wants us to know, okay, right? So what happens? That there is a pasuk, Misha Para. Okay, I'm looking to see if I can find the right Rashi. All right, next to last, the Ramya Alei Lamidak, Shalo Lachzor Lo Mizev Lachzir Lo, Dami Veitain. Rashi doesn't bring the exact pasuk here. Okay, B'misha Para Hilkach Medak Die. Right? In other words, Rashi's referring to the fact that in essence, if he no longer has at hand, okay, the question is, does a curse come upon him? Okay. Ushneim, right? So Rashi goes on there. But what happens? So the Gemara wants to say, why is that the case? V'nichzei zuzei, as we get to ayin dalet. Okay, can't we be able to see, examine, and see the money in his hand? Miman nakat, from whom he took it. Okay, why? Because in theory we could argue there's a migo here. Namely, he could argue, okay, I'm telling you I sold it to so and so because I could always argue what? I never sold it. Right? But therefore, since I've got the money in hand, not only does it tell you that I sold it, but I sold it to so and so. Okay, so that's the possible migo that the seller could argue. Yes, Alan.
We've had situations where, let's say, Reuben owes Shimon money, and Shimon is wanting something from Levi. So Shimon says to Reuben, pay Levi for this thing, and you've satisfied your loan.
Third party payment.
Third party payment.
Right.
So now Levi, who sold it, says, I got the money from Reuben. But Shimon, who's walking away with it.
Right. So that could be the kind of situation. But the Gemara is going to say, hold on a minute. Okay, what is the problem? Says the Gemara, Mimanakat, can't we see from whom he got the money? And you're raising a good question, Alan. That would be theoretically a problem in this issue, right? Lo tzricha denakat mitravaihu, says the Gemara. No, we need to discuss this and go into it because it's possible he received money from both. Okay, and so therefore he could have said, oh, like Heshi might say, oh, I got money today from 3 or 4 people for the seal. Okay, and I didn't write it down. Okay, not to pick on you, Heshi.
I had to write it down.
Okay, in other words, oh, did I get it from Bob? Did I get it from Tzvi? Did I get it from Marty? Okay, so on, right? But I know if I count the amount of money, I got it from 3 people, right? I'm just throwing out, right? Va'amar chad midate. Okay, but our Gemara is telling us it could be that one, he got the money clearly with his consent, with his value. In other words, he acknowledges. V'chad ba'al korche. And the other person basically forced him to take the money. Okay, right? V'lo yadia I mida'ato, v'ai lo mida'ato. And he doesn't remember or know who gave it to him normally with consent, and who was it the one that forced him to take the money. All right. So the Gemara challenges. Okay. And says, well, what about, okay, so therefore that example as a parallel to the midwife doesn't work. Let's try another example, says the Gemara. Ne'eman dayan lomar lezeh, zachiti ulezeh chiyavti. A judge is trustworthy to say, this one I acquitted, I made innocent. And this one I found guilty. B'med varim amorim, what are we talking about? Sheba'alei dinim omdim lefanav, when both litigants are standing in front of him, right? Aval ein ba'alei dinim omdim lefanav, but when both litigants are not standing in front of him, eino ne'eman, he's not to be believed. So the Gemara says, wait, in that case, v'nichzei zechuta manakit. Okay, so therefore we're saying, let us examine the court document and see what was the result. Okay, certainly they write down in court what's the situation. So the Gemara answers, lo tzricha dekaria zechutayu. No, it was needed, okay, to examine the testimony of the judge because the document got ripped up. Okay, says the Gemara. So the Gemara suggests, okay, if that's the case, if we don't have the document, v'nihader v'nidain ninu, let us go back and judge the case all over again. certainly the judge is going to, if he judged in favor of one as opposed to another, certainly isn't, if we judge the case again, going to come up with the same results. Okay? Asks the Gemara. No, says the Gemara. Beshuda de Daine. No, the result was based totally on the discretion of the judge. And with there we mean, okay, either it was a possibility that the judge had to make the decision on his own, okay, and that was what we mean by the discretion, or we can argue that in this case, okay, it was sort of a 50-50 situation, okay, and the judge just, his gut told him, so to speak, all right? So what happens, says the Gemara, Amar Rav Nachman, okay, Shlosha ne'amanim al habachor. Now we get another bright. And Rav Nachman is going to come back to our example, and here we come back to Alan's point, a question earlier, of the role of the midwife. Shlosha ne'amanim al habachor. There are three whose testimony is valid in regards to deciding that a particular infant is the firstborn, right? Eluhain, and these are Chaya, the midwife, Aviv, his father, Ve'imo, and his mother. Okay? Now, certainly you can argue, right? Ideally, the midwife and the mother would be there, right? Be present. So they would know if it's a boy who comes out, okay, is that her first child? Okay, is that her oldest child? Right?
How would the mother know? The mother doesn't see what's going on.
Okay. When they take the child out, all right?
Suppose someone sticks his head out first and then pulls it back.
Oh, that's what I raised yesterday as the question of, do we understand looking away and seeing, is it the midwife or not?
that's
So
what
they're
I'm saying.
saying, okay, so you're raising a slightly different question. What happens if it's twins and one twin puts their head out, right? And then the other, right? Okay, so that's a good question. Let's see what the Gemara if it gives an answer. Okay? Because that adds to Alan's question. All right? So why should we believe then the midwife? All right? So what happens? Chaya la'alter. The midwife is believed immediately if she says at that point, at the birth, okay? Because she's right there helping to remove that child from the womb, and therefore sees if it's a boy or a girl, okay? And then she may know if it was the first child of that womb. Well, okay. Imo, why would the mother know? Kol Shiva, that the first 7 days, the infant is considered under the auspices or authority of the mother. Why? Because she's going to be nursing the child. Okay, we're assuming that's the case. And therefore, right? But what happens after the bris? Under whose authority is the child? Says the Gemara, Aviv la'olam. The father is believed forever. Why? Because the child is now under his authority after the bris. Okay, he's the one who arranges for the bris. If it's the firstborn, he's the one who's going to arrange for a pidyon, a ben, things like that. All of those cases, right? So that's, I'm suggesting, could be possible explanations. Okay, right. All right, he has to know, right, who's going to, that case as well. All right, as far as Zev's point, it could be that if it's twins and the head of one partially comes out or whatever, all right, it could be problematic, right?
But initially, the father doesn't know anything either.
Well, we're assuming that in their day, the father may not have been present, right? Right, we've got examples, right? Uh-huh. Peleg and right. Okay,
Today's modern medicine, and fathers.
fathers usually are there today. They couldn't be there.
Order of conception.
Right. Kiditanya. Why? Because we have a Braita that teaches as follows: Yakir yakirenu la'acherim. That the father is the one, says the Braita, who must make a recognition of the child. Okay, so what happens here? Mikan Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Here Rabbi Yehuda says, Ne'aman Adam Lomar Ze B'ni Bechor. A man is trustworthy to say that this is my son, the firstborn. Okay, always remind us of the old Charlie Chan movies we talked about, right? Son number one. Okay, things like that. Number one son, right? Okay, and by the way, there's an interesting, just as an aside, there's a machloket between Rashi and Tosafot on this particular Braita as to whether, according to Rashi, okay, is this discretion based on circumstantial evidence, or is this based on the view of the judge in terms of what we saw in the shud, okay, in the judge's discretion? Here, okay, it's very clear that the father, it's not a matter of discretion. We're going to see, though, that there's a machloket on this too, that the father can say, this is my son, the firstborn. Ukashem shene'aman lomar ze b'ni b'chor, says Rabbi Yehuda, can say my firstborn, kach ne'aman lomar ze ben grusha. So he's trustworthy to say, this child is the son of a divorcee. V'zeh ben chalutza, and this child is the son of a woman who had chalitza. And therefore, okay, so, and here I'm going to say it's not just ben, okay, it could be a child, not male child, even though it says ben.
The Zebani B'chorei is actually what you say at the Pidyon.
Right. Okay. V'chachamim omrim eino ne'eman. But the sages disagree with Rabbi Yehuda and say, no, the father is not trustworthy under those circumstances. Okay? Okay.
Wouldn't make any difference if it was a girl. It wouldn't make any difference, though.
Okay. Well, the situation with a girl, okay, would be if Ben here is progeny and not son, and it's a chalutza. The question is, could she marry a Kohen? Yeah. Right? That would make the difference. Okay. All right. We pick up the final section of our Mishnah. Abba Shaul haya korei l'shtuki baduki. Okay, he would call that the child that we defined as someone who's not aware of his male parent but only female parent as one who needs to be investigated. My baduki, what do we mean by investigation? Ilema shabotkin et imo. If we say we examine and question his mother, ve'omeret the kasher nivalti. And she says, I had this relationship with somebody whose yichus is kasher, is valid, ne'emenet. She's believed. Kiman, according to whom? K'Rabban Gamliel, according to the view of Rabban Gamliel. Why? Tanina chada zimna. As we learned previously elsewhere in another Gemara, the Tnan taught in a Mishnah, Haita me'uberet, if the woman is pregnant, va'amrula mativo shel ubarze, what is the status of this fetus, right? Thank you. Amra lahem, she says to them, meish ploni v'kohenhu. Okay, he comes from so-and-so, and that man was a Kohen, right? Rabban Gamliel v'Rabbi Eliezer omrim ne'emenet. The two of them say she is to be believed. Rabbi Yoshua omer lo mipiha anu chayim. He argues, no, we do not basically believe her. Not from her mouth do we live by that statement. Okay? What's the problem? Va'amar Rav Yehuda amar Shmuel. And Rav Yehuda right, adds to this discussion. Halacha Rabban Gamliel. The law is like Rabban Gamliel, saying that she is to be believed. Okay, so what happens? Chada lahachshirba. According to at least one view, that of Rabban Gamliel, we say that therefore the child would be considered kasher as yichus. Vehada lahachshir babita. And according to another, namely, we're going to see Abba Shaul, then the daughter would be kasher. Okay? Hanech leman amar l'divrei hamachshir ba. That's acceptable, okay, to the one who says that the infant, the progeny, is going to be kosher, right? Posel babita. That, however, would render invalid the daughter. Elaman amar l'divrei hamachshir ba, machshir babita. But according to the one, namely Abba Shaul, okay, who says that we not only validate the one, we would validate the daughter. Abba Shaul, mai atala ashma'ina. So what's the chiddush then that Abba Shaul is trying to teach us in this view, right? The Abba Shaul adifa midrabanan gamliel. That Abba Shaul is actually adding something on to what Rabban Gamliel was saying. The imehata, because if it's based on that situation, Hava Amina, I would have said Hatam Derov Ksherim Etzla. I could argue that most of the men that had been with this woman, we would say their yichus is valid, right? Aval Hecha Derov Psulin Etzla. But in a situation where the yichus of most of the men that had frequented or spent time with this woman would be invalid, Amalo, I would say no, and Tzricha. Therefore, that's why we needed to bring this machloket and try to show that Abba Shaul is adding something by saying that even the daughter also would be valid in her yichus. Okay? Amar Rava, says Rava, halacha ka Abba Shaul, and the law is like Abba Shaul. So not only do we accept it like Rabban Gamliel, okay, because it was both Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer versus Rabbi Yoshua, so it was 2 against 1 in that situation. So we can understand why Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel said the law was like Rabban Gamliel. Okay? Matnitin, our new Mishnah. Now, in this particular Mishnah, remember we had a lot of discussion as to the fact that the Gemara told us that 5 times was the phrase kahal used in the Torah. Okay, and we saw there was a machloket, okay, and the top of the previous Amud, if I remember correctly, Amud Aleph, right? Right, on top of Ayin Gimel, where according to one view, it spelled out 5 different examples of Kahal, but did not include Gerim. According to another view, they did include Kahal Gerim. Okay, so our Mishnah, our new Mishnah, okay, is going to try to further discuss this topic of who is included in Am Yisrael and who is excluded. Okay? Matnitin, says our Mishnah, Kol ha'asurin lavo b'kahal, all of those who are prohibited from entering the kahal, in other words, I'll take Ammoni, Mitzri, up to the 3rd generation, etc., those examples. Mutarin lavo zeh bazeh. They are permitted to marry one another. Rabbi Yehuda oseh, but Rabbi Yehuda prohibits. Rabbi Eliezer, and we notice that there's a girsa issue here, okay? And others say it was Rabbi Elazar, okay? And we may want to come back to that, right? So it says, Vada'in bod'in mutar. I'm sorry. Vada'in bevada'in mutar. Those who are sure or clear or valid may marry others that are valid, right? But, he argues, vada'in besfekin, ve'usfekin bevada'in, where there are those who are valid, as opposed to those that are status or yichus is questionable, or those whose questionable yichus, marrying those who are certain, usfekin besfekin, and those who are questionable yichus, and those who are questionable yichus, asur, that's forbidden. Okay, so Gemara is bothered by this part of the Mishnah. Why do we need to say in the Mishnah both vada'in b'sfekin usfekin b'vada'in? Right? Wouldn't it be enough to simply say one, and we can learn from one what the other is? Okay. So the implication going to be is there a difference between male and female in terms of whether one is vadai or safek? Okay. Let's see what happens. Right? Ve'elu hein hasfekot, as the Mishnah goes on. These are the ones that we say are of questionable yichus, shtuki, okay? As we've claimed, he knows the mother but not the father. A sufi, a foundling, one who knows neither the yichus of his mother nor his father. Vikuti, and a kuti, one who is a Kuthian. Gemara now picks up. Mai kol ha'isurin lavo b'kahal. What does it mean when it say all the ones that are forbidden, okay, to enter the kahal? Okay. Ilema mamzire unatine shtuke va'asufe. If we're including among these asurim, mamzerim and natinim and the shtukim and the asufim, hatana le resha. We've already learned that in an earlier part, an earlier Mishnah. Okay? Mamzire unatine shtuke va'asufe mutarin lavo ze bazeh. That all of these categories, the mamzerim, natinim, shtukim, and asufim, are permitted to marry one to another. Okay? Vatu, and furthermore, Rabbi Yehuda Oser, what does it mean when it says that Rabbi Yehuda forbids it? Ahia, on which one is he referring to? I lema, if we're talking about avada'in b'sfeikin, on those that are certain of their yichus, marrying those who are of questionable yichus. Ha midikatne sefer, since it's taught in the end, Rabbi Elazar, if we're going to go with that lashon, Omer vada'in b'vada'in mutar. He already says to us that those who are certain of their yichus are permitted to marry others who are certain of their yichus. Vada'in b'sveikan, usveikan b'sveikan asur. That those certain with questionable and questionable with certain are prohibited. Miklal, right? From this we learn in general, the Rabbi Yehuda lo svirale. It must be then that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold this opinion. V'chitema, and if you want to say Rabbi Yehuda Oser, okay, agar b'mamzeret, right? Right? If that's the case, in terms of a ger, okay, b'mamzeret, right? Mode ger b'mamzeret katana. Okay? Don't we already have an example that we've already taught the issue of ger and mamzeret? Kol ha'asurim lavo b'kahal katani. Why? Because here our Mishnah said all that are forbidden to come into the kahal, that's already taught. And what did Rabbi Yehuda say in that regard? Amar Rav Yehuda. He says, Hachika Amar. This is what I'm saying, mean to say. Kol ha'asurim lavo b'kahal kahuna. What I was talking about, that they are prohibited to enter the kahal kahuna. Okay, that particular association or group, right? Ma'ininu. So what do we have here then? Gioret pichuta mi bat. So what are we talking about when it says Gioret pichuta mi bat shalosh shanim v'yom echad? That she's a convert less than 3 years and a day. Right? We're going to ask ourselves, of course, the question: why do they use that particular time frame?
She said she's allowed to marry.
Okay, because exactly as Alan's pointing out, okay, that they consider, okay, I don't want to use the word bia, okay, but she is considered at an age eligible for Erusin, Kiddushin, etc. Okay, Udalo Karabi Shimon ben Yochai, and that's not according to the view, and it disagrees with Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Mutarin lavo ze bazeh. Okay, that one could agree, right? Go with one another, should permit it. V'nokma bevat shalosh shanim v'yom echad, and therefore maybe we could even establish this with somebody who's 3 years and a day. Va'afilu Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, even according to the view of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Okay, what would that be? Imkain, if that's the case, mitzida tavra. Okay, then the argument or the refutation, okay, is handy, is right there in our text. Elatama debat shalosh shanim v'yom echad. But the reason is that when we pick the age of 3 years and a day, ha pichuta mi bat shalosh shanim v'yom echad to muteret lavo b'kahal kuhuna. It would therefore seem that if she's younger than that, okay, she could be able to enter the kahal kuhuna, and what would happen? All right, she may even be permitted to marry a mamzer. Right? So what happens? Asura lavo ze bazeh. But we say instead that it is forbidden for her, for one to marry another. So the Gemara, that's our question. So the Gemara continues. Hare pechuta mibat shalosh shanim b'yom echad. The Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. According to Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, if she's younger than that, dumuteret lavo b'kahal kahuna. She is permitted to go enter the kahal kahuna. Umuteret lavo ze bazeh. And she is also permitted to marry one or another. In other words, even to marry a mamzer. Uklala hu dekol ha'asurim lavo b'kahal kehuna mutarin lavo ze bazeh. Are we saying then that according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, this is a general principle that those that are prohibited to enter the kahal of the kahuna are, however, permitted to marry one another? Right? That's our question. Vahare almana. But wait a second. We've got examples where there are certain women that are not openly permitted, generally permitted to enter kahal kahuna. Namely, Vahare almana, a widow, ugrusha, or a divorcee, v'chalala, or the woman who's a non-desanctified kohenet, v'zona, or a woman that is considered a prostitute, da'asurim lavo b'kahal kuhuna, that they are all not permitted to enter the kahal kuhuna, va'asurim lavo ze bazeh. Okay, right? So they are also then forbidden to marry, okay, one or another. In other words, they're permitted to marry the mamzer. All right. So what happens? So we go on. The two, and furthermore, okay, we've got another way of understanding this. If we say that we've got I want to use the word either or situation. Okay, if you say they can go into the Kal Hashem, shouldn't it mean then that they can't marry? Okay, the other side. Okay, ha mutar, here where we say it's permitted, asur, the inverse should be true, that there would be prohibited. V'harei ger shemutar b'kohenet. But here we've learned that a convert is permitted to marry a kohen. Umutar b'mamzeret, but that the convert is also permitted to marry a mamzeret. Okay. So in other words, how can we say that in one case it's permitted, that the reverse or the inverse is forbidden? Okay. El Amar Rav Natan Bar Oshaya, says Rav. So in other words, we have to give up that explanation and try to come to an alternative explanation. Rav Natan Bar Oshaya says Hachi Kamar. This is what we're talking about. Kol shekohen asurli say et bito. Any situation where the kohen is forbidden to marry his daughter, okay, in other words, marry off his daughter. Umay nihu, okay, and what might these be? Gir shenasa gioret, okay, maybe it's a situation of a convert who marries another convert. Ukarabi Eliezer, and again, question of girsa, like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Mutarin lavo zebazeh, is permitted to marry these other groups. Uklalahu, and we're saying this is a general principle. The kol shekohen asurli sayed brito, that so long as the kohen is forbidden to marry his daughter to any one of these,
The daughter of these people, the daughter of a Ger.
right, to marry them, mutarin lavo zebazeh. Are we saying that they're permitted to marry these other groups? Okay. Harei halal. But what about the example of a desanctified Kohen? Shenasa bat Yisrael, where we've learned that a desanctified Kohen, a halal, can marry a Jewish girl. And what happens? Okay. The Kohen, asruli sebito, that the Kohen is forbidden to marry his daughter. Va'asurinami lavo zebazeh. Okay. And we say that he's forbidden to marry these others. Lo kasha. No, that's not necessarily a problem. Why? Karabi Dostai ben Yehuda. Because we could say it follows the view of Rabbi Dostai ben Yehuda. Why? Because he held Baharei halal shenasah halala. What about the example of a halal that marries a female halala? The kohen asurli say, okay, right? The asurli sabito, and the kohen is forbidden to marry the daughter. Va'asur nami lavo zebazeh, and forbidden to marry among the others, right? The two, and furthermore, again, I could present the text and the inverse. Hamutar, I would say here too. In one case, it should be permitted. In the other case, it should be forbidden. Right? Right? So it would be, right? So here again, I might argue that there's surim, okay, in regarding the daughter, and the others might be a sur towards of Beit Din. Right? That would be another possibility. V'harei ger shenasa bat Yisrael. Okay, what then about the situation of the convert who marries a Jewish girl? For Kohen, mutar lisa bito, and the Kohen is permitted to marry the daughter. Umutarin lavo zebazeh, and permitted to marry among the others. So again, we don't have a clear distinction, a clear explanation here. So we try again. Ela Amar Rav Nachman Amar Rava Bar Abu. Hacha mamzer me'achoto. Here we're talking about a situation where he is a mamzer, okay, from his sister. Umamzer me'eshet ish, or a mamzer from the status of a married woman. Okay, those would all be isurei based. Ika benayu. That's the difference between them. Tanakama savar afilu mamzer me'achoto name have mamzer. That individual would also have the status, yichus status of a mamzer. Rabbi Yehuda savar me'eshet ish have mamzer. That the progeny born from a married woman, that would clearly be a mamzer. Me'achoto lo have mamzer. But one born from his sister would not be classified as a mamzer. My kamashmalan. What's it therefore coming to teach us? Tanina, as we learned, ezahu mamzer. How do we then clearly define the mamzer status? Kol shehu below yavo. We might argue that it's any example where the Torah has a clear mandate, okay, doraita, that it says one cannot go, in other words, have a relationship with that woman. Divrei Rabbi Akiva. In other words, that's Rabbi Akiva's view, that any love, that a prohibition of marriages, the resulting progeny would be considered a mamzer. Okay. However, Shimon Hatemani Omer, Shimon Hatemoni has a different view, namely, Kol Shechayavin Alav Kare B'Yadei Shemayim. Okay, that anyone, that a mamzer is only under those situations who are guilty of having some sort of relationship where the punishment is karet b'yedei shemayim. And the Gemara tells us, v'halacha kidvarav. And the law is like Shimon Hatemani and not like Rabbi Akiva. Right? Now, Rabbi Yoshua Omer, kol shechayavin alav mitat beitin. So Rabbi Yeshua holds a sort of intermediate position where he's arguing where there is a chayav, where it's Isur based in, okay, that one would also be a mamzer in his view. Ella, rather, Amar Rava, as we go on, Ger, Amoni, Umoavi, Ika Beinayim. He's suggesting, Rava, that these are the examples. That's the difference in their view. Namely, Vahachi Kamal. And this is what he's saying. Kol ha'asurim lavo b'kahal. All of these are prohibited to enter the Jewish people. Umay nihu. And who are we referring to? Ger, Amoni, Umoavi, Mutarim lavo zeh bazeh. They are permitted to marry one among the other, right? Ihachi, if that's the case, my Rabbi Yehuda osir. What is it then that Rabbi Yehuda is forbidding? Hachi ka'amar. This is what we must say. Afal pi sheRabbi Yehuda osir ger b'mamzeret. Even though Rabbi Yehuda forbids a convert to marry a mamzeret, Hani mili ger dera'ui lavo b'kahal. We're talking about a ger who is worthy, eligible to enter Am Yisrael. Okay? Or better still, to enter Kahal Gerim. Okay? Aval ger Amoni uMoavi de'ein ru'im lavo b'kahal lo. Okay? But in those cases, they would say no. Right? And now just to finish up a bit, Tanu Rabbanan, okay, Ben Tesha Shanim V'Yom Echad, okay, we're gonna really come back to this tomorrow, okay, because since we dealt with the girl's age, okay, and we say she's eligible, now we're gonna deal with the boy's age, and we're gonna pick up, as I say, there at that point tomorrow, okay?
Yeah.
So this is a lot of